Bloodstains wash out of custom Armani suits, but high society whispers last forever. Clara knew her fat body made her entirely invisible in this cutthroat underground of capos and killers. Tonight, however, stepping out of the shadows to save a trembling, forgotten heir would change the Mafia empire forever. Crystal chandeliers cast fractured, blinding light across the grand ballroom of Cipriani Wall Street. It was the annual winter gala for the Rossi crime syndicate, a masquerade of legitimate business where millions of dollars in illegal enterprise were laundered over plates of beluga caviar and glasses of vintage Dom Perignon. Clara Higgins stood perfectly still near the towering ice sculpture of a swan, doing what she did best, blending into the upholstery. She was a fat girl in a room full of razor-thin mob wives and mistresses who wore size 2 Valentino gowns like armor. Clara's body was soft, abundant, and unapologetically large. She had long ago accepted that in a world where women were traded as shiny, sleek currency, she was deemed practically worthless. Her father, Richard Higgins, was a mid-level forensic accountant for the family, a nervous, balding man who survived by keeping his head down and the ledgers pristine. He had begged Clara to attend tonight, hoping to show the boss that the Higgins family was loyal, present, and supportive. Clara smoothed the dark emerald fabric of her plus-size evening gown. She had altered it herself to ensure the bodice fit her heavy breasts securely, while the skirt flowed generously over her wide hips and thick thighs. She knew she looked beautiful, but she also knew the rules of this room. The women here looked at her with thinly veiled pity or outright disgust, their eyes lingering on her bare, fleshy arms before flicking away. Clara didn't mind the invisibility. In the Mafia, being noticed usually meant being targeted. But Clara wasn't the only ghost haunting the Rossi Gala tonight. Across the room, sequestered in a dimly lit alcove near the emergency exits, sat Leo Rossi. He was 24 years old, the youngest son of Don Lorenzo Rossi and the most fiercely guarded secret in the New York underworld. Leo was profoundly autistic. In a brutal patriarchal society that valued aggression, smooth talking, and violence, Leo was a gentle, easily overwhelmed soul. Clara watched him from a distance, chewing thoughtfully on a crostini. Leo was currently rocking back and forth on a velvet-gilded chair. He wore a heavy pair of industrial noise-cancelling headphones over his dark, messy curls. His tuxedo jacket was draped over the back of the chair because Clara guessed the stiff wool fabric was a sensory nightmare against his skin. His hands were clasped tightly in his lap, his thumbs rubbing together in a rapid, rhythmic stim. The cruelty of the room was breathtaking. Dozens of made men politicians and socialites walked past Leo's alcove as if he were a defective piece of furniture. No one offered him a drink. No one smiled at him. When his father, the terrifying Lorenzo Rossi, walked past, the Don merely cast a heavy, sorrowful glance at his youngest son before turning back to a conversation with a corrupt state senator. Worse than the neglect was the outright malice. Clara's eyes narrowed as Matteo Rossi Leo's older brother and the heir apparent strolled up to the alcove. Matteo was everything a Mafia prince was supposed to be, handsome, ruthless, and entirely devoid of empathy. He was flanked by his capo's men with thick necks and cruel laughs. Matteo stopped right in front of Leo. Clara couldn't hear the words over the sweeping orchestral music playing from the live band, but she could read the aggressive posture. Matteo leaned in, flicking the side of Leo's headphones. Leo flinched violently, shrinking back into the velvet cushions, his eyes squeezed shut. Matteo laughed a sharp, ugly sound and deliberately dropped his heavy crystal Scotch glass onto the marble floor. Crash. Even from across the room, Clara saw Leo's entire body convulse. The sharp, sudden vibration and the high-pitched shattering of glass penetrated his defenses. Leo's hands flew to his ears over the headphones, his breathing turning rapid and shallow. He was entering a meltdown, trapped in a public venue, with nowhere to hide, surrounded by predators. Matteo sneered, turning his back on his brother and walking toward the VIP tables. Clara felt a hot, unfamiliar spike of fury ignite in her chest. She knew what it was like to be treated as a nuisance, to be looked at and dismissed as a waste of space. Her weight made her a target for the same kind of casual, dehumanizing cruelty Matteo had just displayed. The mobsters saw her as a punchline. They saw Leo as a tragic burden. She set her half-empty plate down on a passing waiter's tray. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm, warning her to stay put. "Don't get involved with the Rossis," her father's voice echoed in her head. "We are nobodies, Clara. Nobodies survive by staying invisible." But as Clara looked at Leo, who was now quietly hyperventilating, his knuckles turning white as he gripped his own hair, she knew she couldn't stay in the shadows anymore. She took a deep breath, letting her broad shoulders drop, and stepped out onto the open floor. The live orchestra transitioned smoothly into a slow, sweeping waltz. Couples began to drift toward the polished mahogany dance floor in the center of the room. Clara's path to Leo's alcove cut directly across the perimeter of the floor. As she moved, the whispers began. "Is that the Higgins girl?" A voice hissed from a cluster of women in shimmering silver dresses. "Good Lord, she takes up half the aisle. You'd think she'd have the decency to wear black to hide all of that. Where is she waddling off to?" Clara kept her chin high, letting the cruel comments slide off her back. Her thick thighs brushed together under the heavy emerald silk, with every step her soft belly preceding her, a physical manifestation of the space she was finally choosing to occupy. She reached the alcove just as Matteo, noticing her trajectory from his VIP booth, barked a loud, mocking laugh. "Hey, look at this!" Matteo's voice boomed, cutting through the music. The immediate vicinity fell quiet, heads turning. "The elephant is heading for the broken toy. $5,000 to the accountant's daughter, if she can get the autard to stand up." A wave of sycophantic laughter rippled through Matteo's crew. At the head table, Don Lorenzo Rossi stiffened his cold eyes, snapping toward his eldest son in warning, but he said nothing. He too turned to watch Clara. Clara stopped 2 feet away from Leo. She didn't look at Matteo. She didn't look at the Don. She focused entirely on the terrified young man in front of her. Leo was trapped in a sensory storm, his eyes fixed on the floor, his breathing ragged. Clara knelt down slowly, her dress pooling around her large frame, like a dark green ocean. She made sure to stay out of his direct line of sight, so as not to force eye contact, positioning herself at an angle. "Leo," she said. Her voice was low, smooth, and steady. She pitched it below the frequencies of the surrounding chatter. He didn't move, but his rapid rocking paused for a fraction of a second. "My name is Clara," she continued softly, keeping her hands visible and resting on her own knees. "The floor is vibrating from the base of the cellos. It's a 4/4 time signature. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's just math, Leo. Predictable math." Leo's thumbs slowed their frantic rubbing. He tilted his head slightly, the edge of his noise-cancelling headphones shifting. Clara knew that for someone with severe sensory processing differences, unpredictable environments were terrifying. She needed to offer him an anchor. "It's too bright over here, and the glass on the floor is sharp," Clara murmured, extending one plump, soft hand, palm up. "If you hold my hand, I can guide you to the center of the room. The lights are dimmed over the dance floor. The music is louder, but the rhythm will match your breathing." For 10 agonizing seconds, nothing happened. The silence in the immediate area was deafening. Matteo snickered. "Told you, the lights are on, but nobody's home." Then slowly, Leo lifted his head. He didn't look at Clara's eyes. Instead, his gaze locked onto the soft, generous curve of her outstretched hand. To him, sharp edges were dangerous. Clara had no sharp edges. She was warm, solid, and entirely grounded. Trembling, Leo reached out. His long, elegant fingers bypassed the air and rested gently against Clara's palm. A collective gasp swept through the nearby onlookers. Don Lorenzo Rossi actually dropped his cigar. Leo hadn't allowed physical contact from anyone, not even his own father, in over a decade. Clara closed her fingers lightly around his, providing firm, deep pressure without trapping him. "Good," she whispered. "I'm going to stand up now. You come with me." Using her formidable strength, Clara rose gracefully, pulling Leo up with her. He was tall, over 6 feet, but he hunched his shoulders to make himself smaller. Clara didn't pull him toward the exit. Instead, she guided him straight toward the center of the dance floor. The crowd parted for them, shock radiating from the Mafia elite. Clara placed Leo's right hand on her wide waist. She took his left hand in hers, holding it firmly against her chest, right over her steady heartbeat. "Just sway," she instructed softly. 1, 2, 3, 4. They began to move. It wasn't a traditional waltz. It was a slow, rhythmic rocking, matching the tempo of the cellos. Clara's large body acted as a physical shield, blocking Leo from the stares of the room. She absorbed the harshness of the environment, giving him a safe, soft harbor. As they turned slowly under the dimmed chandelier, Clara felt Leo's rigid muscles begin to melt. His breathing synced with the rise and fall of her heavy chest. They were a stark contrast, the morbidly fat daughter of a nobody and the tall, striking, broken prince of the underworld. Yet in that moment, they moved with a synchronized grace that silenced every cruel mouth in the room. As they rotated near the edge of the floor, Clara noticed Matteo staring at them, his face pale, with a mixture of rage and disbelief. Suddenly, Leo shifted. He lowered his head, pressing his cheek against Clara's shoulder. His lips brushed the shell of her ear, slipping just beneath the rim of his heavy headphones. Clara expected a sigh. She expected silence. Instead, a raspy, unused voice whispered directly into her ear, a voice that hadn't spoken a single word aloud since he was 8 years old. Matteo cut the brake lines on Uncle Carmine's Cadillac. Clara's blood ran ice cold. She stumbled over her own feet, her heavy frame jarring as she missed a step. Carmine Rossi, the Don's beloved younger brother and right-hand man, had died in a horrific car crash off the Brooklyn Bridge just yesterday morning. The police had ruled it a tragic mechanical failure. The entire gala tonight was supposed to be, in part, a memorial tribute to him. Clara's heart pounded violently against Leo's hand. She looked up at the VIP table. Matteo was glaring daggers at her, unaware of what had just been said, but clearly furious that Clara had succeeded where he had demanded failure. Don Lorenzo was watching her with an unreadable, terrifying intensity. She held the most dangerous secret in New York City. She was a fat, invisible girl who had just danced her way into the center of a deadly Mafia civil war. Leo's grip on her waist tightened, his thumb pressing deeply into the soft flesh of her side. "Keep dancing, Clara," the air whispered. "If we stop, he'll kill us both." Fear tasted like copper, sharp and metallic on Clara's tongue, but her expression remained an unreadable mask of calm. She forced her leaden feet to continue the 1, 2, 3, 4 rhythm, her wide, silk-covered hips swaying to maintain the hypnotic motion that kept Leo anchored. If she stopped moving, they were dead. Clara understood the ruthless mathematics of the Mafia better than anyone. Her father had taught her that numbers never lied, but people always did. Right now, the only truth in the room was the trembling young man holding on to her. How do you know? Clara breathed the words out slowly, barely moving her lips. She kept her eyes focused on the silk lapel of Leo's tuxedo, ensuring nobody watching could tell they were conversing. Leo's chest hitched against hers. He kept his face buried in the soft curve of her neck, his voice a jagged whisper. Sensory input. Matteo returned to the penthouse at 3:14 in the morning. He bypassed the security cameras, but the heavy oak door hinges vibrated. He smelled overwhelmingly of Tom Ford cologne, but underneath it, .4 synthetic brake fluid, heavy polyethylene glycol. Clara's mind raced. Leo wasn't oblivious to the world. He was drowning in its details. His brain processed every smell, every micro-expression, every shift in air pressure. He had been labeled defective because he couldn't filter the noise, but that very lack of a filter made him the most dangerous witness in the Rossi syndicate. Uncle Carmine found the offshore discrepancies. Leo continued his thumb, resuming its rhythmic, frantic pressing into Clara's waist. Matteo has been skimming from the Fulton Fish Market distribution lines. I saw the bank slips in Matteo's jacket pocket when the maid laid it out for dry cleaning. I memorized the routing numbers. The final chords of the waltz swelled through the ballroom. Clara knew they only had seconds left before the illusion of this dance broke. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her veins. "Grand Central Terminal, locker 402, Leo whispered quickly as the music began to fade. "Carmine's backup ledger. He mailed me the key before he died. I hid it. As the applause trickled through the room, scattered and deeply uncomfortable, Clara gently pulled back. She didn't let go of Leo's hands immediately. She offered him a warm, reassuring squeeze, acting every bit the maternal harmless wallflower she was presumed to be. Before they could even step off the mahogany floor, a heavy hand clamped down on Clara's bare shoulder, digging painfully into her soft flesh. "That's enough charity work for one night, Shamu," Matteo hissed, yanking her back. Clara stumbled, her heavy frame colliding with a cocktail table, but she caught herself. She turned to face Matteo, forcing her heartbeat to slow. She allowed her shoulders to slump, adopting the meek, intimidated posture of the accountant's fat daughter. "I apologize, Matteo," Clara said softly, keeping her eyes cast downward toward his polished Ferragamo loafers. "I noticed he was about to have a vocal meltdown. The SEC regulators at Table 4 have been watching your family all evening. A disturbance would have drawn federal eyes. It was merely a distraction tactic." Matteo paused, his cruel eyes darting toward the table she had mentioned. The underlying paranoia of a guilty man flared in his pupils. He sneered, disgusted, but momentarily pacified by her logical, business-minded excuse. "Keep your massive nose out of family business, Higgins," Matteo warned, stepping close enough that Clara could smell the scotch on his breath. "Or I'll have my men carve the fat off your bones." As Matteo shoved past her to grab Leo's arm, Clara felt a sharp, cold piece of metal slide effortlessly into the deep pocket of her emerald dress. Leo had bumped into her deliberately. The drop was flawless. Matteo dragged his brother away, shoving the noise-cancelling headphones back over Leo's ears with brutal force. Clara stood alone on the edge of the dance floor, her hand deep in her pocket fingers, wrapping around a brass locker key. She was no longer a bystander. She was a soldier in a war no one else knew had started. Rain lashed against the towering reinforced windows of the Rossi family estate in Tot Hill, Staten Island. It was a sprawling fortress, built to resemble a Renaissance palazzo, a modern monument to an empire cemented in blood and whispered secrets. Stepping into the cavernous grand foyer water, pooling at the hem of her heavy black wool coat, Clara Higgins felt the crushing weight of history in the space. For nearly a century, men had walked into this very room and never walked out. Clara, however, stood tall. Her mother had always taught her that dynasties were toppled not by opposing armies, but by the people society forgot to count. Clara was a fat woman in a world that demanded women be small, quiet, and easily digestible. She refused to shrink. Clutching a thick leather-bound folio tightly against her chest, she ignored the cold, predatory stares of the armed enforcers and demanded an audience with Don Lorenzo Rossi. Heavy oak doors swung open, groaning loudly on their custom iron hinges. Clara stepped into the Don's private study, a room suffocating with the scent of stale cigar smoke, aged leather, and unspoken violence. Don Lorenzo sat behind a massive desk carved from solid mahogany. To his right stood Matteo, wearing a bespoke Brioni suit, his posture reeking of unchecked arrogance. In the far corner, swallowed by a dark leather wingback armchair, sat Leo. He rocked gently, his heavy noise-cancelling headphones securely in place, his dark eyes fixed intensely on the roaring fireplace. "Richard Higgins's daughter." Don Lorenzo rumbled his voice, scraping like rough stone over stone. "You have considerable nerve walking into my home uninvited. My guards say you have information regarding my brother Carmine's death." Clara didn't flinch. She walked deliberately toward the mahogany desk, her heels clicking against the polished hardwood with rhythmic, unrelenting authority. "I do not have information. Don Lorenzo," Clara stated, setting the leather folio down with a heavy, final thud. "I have proof." Matteo erupted into a cruel, barking laugh. "Are you entirely out of your mind? We are letting the accountant's blimp waste our time. Throw her in the Narrows before I lose my temper." Silence. The Don snapped his dead shark-like eyes, never leaving Clara's face. "Show me what you have, girl." Clara opened the folio. Without relying on simple summaries, she walked the Don through the meticulous forensic nightmare she had spent 48 sleepless hours unraveling. She laid out the bank statements, the hidden routing numbers, and the encrypted ledgers Carmine had secured in a rented locker at Grand Central Terminal. She explained with devastating, unassailable clarity how $7 million had been systematically bled from the Fulton Fish Market distribution lines and the Tri-State Waste Management contracts. The money had been funneled through a ghost corporation hidden in the Cayman Islands. Anyone with half a brain could set up a shell company in Nassau. Don Lorenzo murmured, his thick fingers tracing the highlighted numbers on the parchment. "This proves money is missing from my streets. It does not prove murder. The missing capital is only the motive," Clara countered, smoothly stepping closer to the desk. She used her formidable physical size to command the space, forcing Matteo to take an unconscious half-step back. "The execution is in the details. Only one person used this specific offshore routing number to wire an untraceable $50,000 to the chief mechanic at the Brooklyn impound lot. That wire transfer was authorized exactly 2 days before your brother's Cadillac was ruled a tragic mechanical failure." Clara pulled a final damning printed receipt from the back of the folder. "The digital signature traces back to the private IP address of your eldest son's penthouse." The oxygen vanished from the study. Matteo's face flushed a violent, panicked red. He slammed his fist onto the mahogany surface. "She is lying. She forged these documents. She is a nobody, a fat cow, trying to extort our family." "I am an accountant." Clara's voice boomed, echoing powerfully against the vaulted ceiling. "Numbers leave an undeniable trail. Carmine found your trail, Matteo. So you severed his brake lines, drowning him in the river to bury your theft." Matteo snarled his hand, diving beneath his tailored jacket toward his shoulder holster. "I will kill you right here, you stupid—" "Matteo!" Don Lorenzo roared, surging to his feet. In a flash of terrifying speed, the old man drew a heavy silver revolver from his desk drawer and leveled it squarely at his eldest son's chest. "Do not move another inch. You tell me this is a lie, Matteo. Swear it on your mother's grave." Matteo froze his hands, trembling in the air. "Papa, you cannot believe her. She has no witnesses. Carmine is dead, and this bitch is guessing. She is not guessing." The voice was a low, resonant baritone, rough from years of disuse, but crackling with undisputed aristocratic authority. Clara turned. In the corner, Leo had stopped rocking. He reached up with perfectly steady hands and pulled the heavy headphones from his ears, letting them clatter against the floorboards. The boy who was supposed to be broken, the son who was deemed a mute liability, rose to his feet. He walked into the center of the room, his tall frame suddenly casting a massive lethal shadow over his brother. "You returned to the penthouse at 3:14 on Tuesday morning, Matteo." Leo spoke, his enunciation sharp and flawless. "You bypassed the security cameras, but the oak doors vibrated. You smelled intensely of Tom Ford cologne, but beneath it was the distinct, sweet chemical stench of DOT4 synthetic brake fluid. I saw the grease on your right French cuff. I saw the Cayman Bank slips in your pocket. I told Uncle Carmine about the offshore accounts 3 weeks ago." Don Lorenzo staggered back slightly, staring at his youngest son as if witnessing a resurrection. "Leo, you speak." "I always could, Father," Leo answered coldly. But there was no one in this family worth speaking to. Until Clara. Leo extended his hand. Clara placed hers within his grasp, his long fingers wrapped around hers, warm and solid. He did not flinch. He anchored himself to her unyielding strength. "Matteo murdered your brother, Father," Leo declared, his dark eyes locking onto the Don. "He betrayed our blood. In the history of our syndicate, there has only ever been one penalty for treason." Matteo shrieked a sound of pure, unadulterated terror and yanked his weapon free. Bang! The gunshot was deafening. Matteo's eyes went wide as a crimson stain blossomed across the crisp white cotton of his dress shirt. He collapsed backward, tangling in the expensive Persian rug before lying perfectly still. The acrid scent of sulfur filled the room. Clara squeezed Leo's hand tightly, bracing to shield him from the sensory shock. But Leo was utterly serene. The chaotic storm of his mind had finally found its quiet center. Don Lorenzo slowly lowered his smoking gun. He looked from his dead son to his living one, witnessing the brutal, undeniable transfer of power. "You hid your brilliant mind to survive," Don Lorenzo whispered. "I survived by being a ghost," Leo corrected softly. "But ghosts cannot protect what is theirs." He turned to Clara, pressing a slow, deliberate kiss to the back of her hand. "You saw me when the rest of the world was blind. Together we will build a new empire." Clara smiled, her heart pounding a steady, victorious rhythm. She was no longer a shadow in the margins. She was the architect of a new dynasty. If Clara and Leo's epic rise to power kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button. Right now, their journey proves that true strength comes in all shapes, and that the most underestimated people hold the most dangerous secrets. Share this thrilling Mafia romance with your friends who love a brilliant curvy heroine and a misunderstood hero. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss another heart-stopping, true-to-life story.